and welcome to another edition of our Sprott Media Live series with Rick Rule. I'm Albert Liu, here today to discuss an event that I'm going to be attending in San Diego. That is Libertopia 2018. Rick, I was really hoping that you were going to be speaking at this event, but your travel schedule doesn't allow you to do that. So I thought we'd hold this little online event where you talk about some of the themes that you would have addressed had you been able to speak at Libertopia 2018.
A pleasure. I'm intrigued by the growing number of libertarian events, most of which I suspect grew out of Doug Casey's old Eras conference. Certainly Freedom Festival, Libertopia, Capitalism and Morality are examples of libertarian themed gatherings that my suspicion is all have a common genesis from the old Eras conferences, which I quite miss.
So I was talking with Jeffrey Tucker leading up to this event as well. He is going to be emceeing this event. And he said something that was interesting. He said that, you know, the California liberty community is distinct from the one in Texas, from the one in New Hampshire. And for the last year, I've taken an intense personal interest in the California liberty scene. I want it to thrive. So do you have an experience with that? Have you noticed this?
Because I'm culturally a Californian, I think the sort of libertarian and anarcho-capitalist community in California is particularly amusing because it sort of, I think, in many senses came out of the left, came out of the counterculture in the 1970s. At least that was how I came to it. The Los Angeles community, in particular Galambos, who spawned so many great California anarchists and libertarians didn't come out of the conservative community necessarily, but they came out of the sort of free-thinking atmosphere of the 1970s, and I suspect that that's very different than the way libertarian communities in other parts of the country, particularly Texas and the Deep South, came about. And given the fact that I'm Californian, I'm probably culturally more comfortable with the freewheeling nature of the California libertarian community.
Yeah, it's funny because if you look at, for instance, say the Texas libertarian community, Texas is not monolithic. There's Austin, which is very different than the other cities, and I see some similarities actually between the community in Austin and what I've experienced here in Southern California.
The truth is, Albert, there's few enough of us, and we tend to splinter so easily that I think we should begin this discussion by saying that anybody who is more or less, I guess the right phrase today is down with the idea that things like the non-aggression principle are important parts of the way we view ourselves. I think we need to say, Californians, welcome. Right. Texans, welcome. Icelandics, welcome. If you're from Rwanda, part of Students for Liberty, Rwanda, come on in. We got room for you.
We have more than enough room. One thing that is sort of interest these days is the value of information, the value of personal information. And a lot of people are libertarian, I think, in their ideas about owning their information, their identity, and whatnot. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I can, actually. One of the things that I've learned is that with so much information, misinformation, purported information available, we are beginning to suffer, everybody, myself included, information overload. And what happens now is that information becomes a little less valuable than the ability to organize and systematize and act on information. And what seems to really be of renewed importance is personal brand. That is, somebody who doesn't just transmit information, but in fact processes the information for people and offers up branded conclusions. Certainly our success at Sprott has had a lot to do with the fact that we analyze information from 3,000 publicly traded mining companies around the world, and we don't pass it on unprocessed. We try and select from information about 3,000 companies, and we try and come up with 100 or so that we can focus on with a straight face. This isn't meant to be a Sprott commercial, but simply to say that the thing that's of value now is the ability to organize and systematize this information and draw conclusions from it, supported, of course, by the data. And I think increasingly, one of the things that will be useful in popularizing the libertarian message will be for commentators like Jeffrey Tucker that have the analytical and the communication skills to point to data, to point to fact, to point for information, and use them to substantiate, in a real sense, the common libertarian themes. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to use the public discussion forums, to use user-generated content and the new markets that are being created by user-generated content, not merely to regurgitate or pass on facts, but in fact to organize and systematize those facts around themes that people might not have thought about. When you talk about a broad concept, many people grasp a broad concept if you put it in the context of a personal story. And having the ability to harness those personal stories on the web and use them as illustrations for liberty-oriented concepts, I think is probably the best way that all of us stand to popularize our viewpoints.
You know, on the topic of brands, one of the things that a brand, I guess, can harness is a level of trust. Because the person receiving this condensed information, oftentimes they just need to know it's not sophistry, right? That you have a track record behind you. And that's what Facebook is struggling with right now, I think, is that their past, in a way, is haunting them because they haven't been trustworthy in the past. And something like this happens again, people look at the history.
Albert, I'm smiling, not because I disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. I think that Facebook should have done a better job of safeguarding people's personal information. Why I'm really smiling is the incredible fuss that you see about Facebook, everybody being concerned about privacy violations with regards to Facebook, and people being seemingly unaware or uncaring or even supportive of our own government spying on us directly. That isn't being guilty of negligence, but in fact being guilty of intent. The sight of those congressmen pouring the coals to Zuckerberg without Zuckerberg being able to say to them, you know, I never directly spied on millions of people like you did. I mean, it's about time, as a very large taxpayer, that I got to ask you some questions. It was a silly spectacle, I think.
Yeah, well, there's always a hypocrisy.
By the way, going back to your brand question, I absolutely agree. Having the ability to organize and systematize information and help people draw conclusions is all about establishing a track record for being successful at that. Yeah. It's all about building trust. That's what a personal brand is. It's all about building trust.
So on that topic, you did a talk some time ago that inspired me, and that was, the theme was an anarchist's duty to succeed. And so can you sort of summarize what that talk was about? And we'll link to the full talk, but if you could just summarize what it was about.
Well, it's a funny coincidence. You may not remember this, but the genesis of that talk was an interview that you did with Doug Casey and I about penniless libertarians. And the idea that so many free market capitalists had no assets,
right.
Which I always found, I found it tragic, first of all, but also fairly amusing. And what I wanted to do was, in a very gentle way, I suspect, not my norm, but anyway, a gentle way, to motivate my fellow libertarians and anarcho-capitalists. So often, people with our point of view are more philosophically successful than they are financially successful. And I'm not suggesting for a second, by the way, that every measure of success is a financial measure of success. I think in order to be a success, you need to be financial. You need to be a success in your own terms. If those are financial, God bless. If those aren't, God bless too. But I wanted to defend, if that's necessary, pecuniary success because it's so strangely lacking in our own community. And the way I like to start is by reminding libertarians that in one sense, financial success is evidence that you aided mankind. Right. People reward you with money, and money is in effect distilled will and its own reward for your own efforts. People reward you with money for providing a good and service that they want more than they want the money. Ergo, to the extent that at least you earn your money honestly. I'm not talking necessarily now about people who extort or use government to get money, but people who provide a good or service that's freely available that other people buy. The fact that they bought it is evidence that they got benefit from it. Right. I'm amused now, as an example, that Bill Gates, who was a pariah when he was simply a hugely successful human being, is now widely regarded as a great guy because he gives money away. So the first question is, how did he get the money that he gave away? The truth was he earned it. He changed the world. Whether or not you happen to like Microsoft software, the way that we exist today is in many senses a consequence of his success with PC software. And I would argue with you that he did more good making the money, he provided more benefit for more people than he has done giving the money away. And I suspect what he's doing today is counterproductive on a global basis. With his ability at social organization, with his grasp of technology, with his brand, I suspect he could do more for mankind investing that money in new technologies that had the ability to change the world than he is by giving inoculations. Now, it's his money. He has no duty to pay attention to the way that I would like him to spend his life and his money. But the truth is, you need to remember that that accumulation of capital was proof in and of itself of an amazing contribution to mankind. Too often people, including libertarians and anarchists, believe that people that have made money have some duty with that money. And I would argue the fact that they made the money has discharged the duty.
I always say that giving back is actually giving again.
Correct.
Right? Because you gave once, and now people are asking you to give again. I remember that talk we did at Jayan's conference, and I'm always like interested in thinking about why people do what they do. So if, for instance, if the sole motivation for production is just material wealth, you can see the problem that once you accumulate as much as one can, reasonably consume, they're going to turn their efforts towards something else. I wonder, that's probably not the case with Bill Gates, because he would have turned it off long before he did, if that was his motivation.
I can't speculate on Mr. Gates and that question. I can tell you with regards to myself, sadly, I've been somewhat less successful than Mr. Gates, although my life has certainly given me all the material rewards that I could want. When I was interested in making money per se, that is, when my goal was to make money, I did reasonably well. When I decided that making money wasn't as important to me as doing what interested me and making money for other people, the rewards that came from putting the utility in front of the reward itself was mind-boggling. As soon as I stopped worrying about making money and started worrying about perfecting myself as a product, I started making more money than I could count. And I suspect that happened with Gates. I'm not suggesting that at the beginning of his career he wasn't interested in making a lot of money. I am certain, however, that he made more money than he knew existed.
Right.
And the way he made the money was by focusing on delivering an operating system for personal computers. In other words, he was driven by the product, not by the reward. And you find, at least I have found, that most great entrepreneurs on a global basis have had that as their sort of operating methodology. I know I was fortunate in my career to get to know very well Adolf Lundin, who was one of the great oil and gas and mining entrepreneurs of all times. And Adolf was totally focused on exploration and discovery. Now, he did a good job after he made a discovery of monetizing it, but that isn't what drove him. What drove him was finding the billion-barrel field or the 10 million ounce discovery. And I bring up Adolf because that's one of the people that I know that made $1 billion from a standing start, who best exemplifies the fact that it was delivering the utility that was important rather than the reward, which is why he, in fact, delivered utility.
Right. Let's shift to the latter half of the talk. So the first half of the talk was talking about commercial success, right? How it's not something that should be shunned, for example. But you say it has tremendous utility in spreading the message of liberty.
I think that's right. We talked at the beginning of this discussion about the fact that a personal brand has to do with reputation and trust. And I have found myself that I am successful spreading the message of self-determination and liberty if I dress it in financial clothes. People listen to me not because they want to hear me be a philosopher. They listen to me because they want me to help them get rich. And if I talk about subjects that I have a reputation in, which are financial subjects, natural resources, financial services, things like that, if I talk about those topics and give people a reason to listen to me that appeals to their own needs, I can lay a liberty message in. Because a liberty message, I think, is important in terms of investing. Many investors, as an example, believe that the government is their friend, but not in an honest investment. In fact, the government is not your friend. There is a legitimate place for that message in any discussion of investing. But for me personally, the only way I can get myself listened to when I talk about libertarian or anarchist themes is to dress them up in a subject where I'm regarded as an expert because I've made money, I've been a success. So certainly being successful makes you a better propagandist for liberty because it gives you a podium to speak from, and it gives you an audience of people who are predisposed to listen to you. It might be that as a consequence of making money, it doesn't make me a better philosopher or a better proponent, but what it does do is get me listened to.
Yeah, I think, and maybe this is not to counter what you're saying, it's actually to expand on what you're saying. In general, I think living well is a nice tool by which you can communicate your philosophy, your creed.
I think that's true too, and that brings us into a sort of a second discussion about success and all these things, which is philanthropy. My friend Doug Casey has always said that philanthropy is counterproductive, despite the fact that he's an active philanthropist. Doug is a complex human. And I've come to the conclusion that a lot of what he says is true. A lot of philanthropy is counterproductive. If the money is given out of a sense of guilt,
right,
and if the money that is given breeds a sense of entitlement in the recipient, or a sense of dependency in the recipient, that's a bad thing. What philanthropy is for me is a consumer good. I do it because it is part of, for me, living well. When I give money to Students for Liberty, as an example, which I do, it's a substitute for doing what I'd really rather do, which is give time and hang out with young libertarians. And if Students for Liberty were a profit-making organization where I could actually pay them by convert as opposed to as a nonprofit. I would prefer that, but that's not the way it's organized. But when you talk about living well, that's where philanthropy comes in to me. You know, there's only so many steaks you can eat. If you look at me, I've probably exceeded that number by a bit. There's only so many material benefits, I think, of having been a success that you can consume. But for me, an important part of living well, and probably a part of my reputation, has to do with philanthropy. So when you ask about living well, I think, of course, living honorably, putting utility in front of recompense. But also, I think, at least for me, the sense of well-being that comes from intelligent philanthropy is an important part of living well. And I agree with you that living well, in fact, being easy within your own skin, makes you a more successful human being and makes you a more effective proponent for liberty.
I think one of the things, because in tongue-in-cheek, I was sort of making fun of our community back in Vancouver, and I think one of the things that holds us back is that we truly are a minority, and we like to associate with people from our group, which makes commerce kind of difficult.
Yes.
If you think about creating products for this group, is kind of, you know, that's uphill. If you talk about forming a company, engaging in some productive endeavor, there's just not very many of us. And for some reason, our political opponents don't seem to mind doing business with anyone. Is that something we just have to get over?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we have to speak to more than our own community. We have to design products for the broader community. But by the way, well, I have 2 points. The first is, one of the reasons that we're so small is that we fight so viciously among ourselves and try and exclude each other. Are you a fat libertarian or a thin libertarian? Well, clearly I'm not a thin libertarian, but I hope that the thin libertarians would like to hang out with me anyway. Are you a left libertarian? Are you an anarcho-capitalist? All these labels are horseshit. The truth is, are you for more liberty or for less liberty? And if the answer begins with more, you're a friend of mine, okay? Now, with regards to products, the truth is that there is an amazingly successful information marketing firm in the world, Agora Publishing, which now has, as I understand it, 2.6 million unique paid subscribers worldwide. And the message that they're marketing, make no mistake, is a libertarian message. It isn't cloaked in "this is good for you" philosophical rhetoric. It's cloaked in "we can make you money today." But the message coming out of Agora is decidedly libertarian, and it's decidedly popular and profitable on a global basis. Now, the truth is, if they called themselves a libertarian organization, they'd probably have 7 subscribers. That's not how they hold themselves out to be. But the idea that the libertarian message isn't commercially successful is not right.
That's interesting. Of the things I guess we have now to celebrate, meaning Students for Liberty is a cause that you're excited about, these conferences that are springing up, cryptocurrencies, what gets you the most excited right now?
Oh, God, they all do. I guess Students for Liberty gets me the most excited because I interact the most deeply with it. I had occasion a couple months ago to do a Skype conversation with young members of Students for Liberty who were in, if my memory serves me well, Uganda and Rwanda. And the idea that we're making headroads, by we I mean the libertarian community, in these, you know, sort of former African statist hellholes is extremely important to me. I remember before that doing Skype interviews with Louis James in the Casey Cycle program, which was sponsored by Students for Liberty. And I was able to address 300 or 400 Eastern European student libertarians at a time. And I have to tell you, Albert, it was interesting. He wanted me to talk about practical subjects like entrepreneurship, which I did, but I sort of began them with my normal anti-state rants. And I remember at one of these gatherings, young people in Minsk, in Belarus, a young woman had the temerity to interrupt me, and she said, Mr. Rule, we all come from a communist country. We have lived through what you're talking about. You can save your breath on the freedom part. Can we get to the making money part? Which was absolutely wonderful. And that sort of person-by-person success is what I'm having the most fun with. As you know, at Sprott, we've been working very, very hard on blockchain or distributed ledger technology with regards to ledger entry for gold at trade winds. And the whole technological aspect of freedom offered up by the blockchain and the distributed ledger is extremely important to me too. And going back, frankly, to the theme of penniless libertarians, one of the lovely things about Bitcoin is that some libertarians who I personally knew to be penniless libertarians are in fact now multimillionaires as a consequence of their figuring out the utility offered up by blockchain long before other people did. I think that the distributed ledger and blockchain, among other things, forever vaulted our mutual friend Jeffrey Tucker from wage slave obscurity, working for libertarian philanthropies that could afford to pay him when they could afford to pay him, and I suspect permanently changed his and many others, personal balance sheets, which is great.
It is fabulous. I think we'll end on that very, very positive note. Libertopia is just a couple days away, May 3rd through 6th here in San Diego. Go to libertopia.org for that. The Sprott conference takes place this July 17th. Come see Rick Rule, Jim Grant, Doug Casey, James Rickards, David Stockman, and a whole bunch of other great speakers. That's at sprottconference.com. And then let's just do one last plug for Giant's conference, Capitalism and Morality. Your original speech took place there. We're going to link to it on this video, but let's get a plug in for Giant.
Absolutely. If you're coming to our Vancouver conference in particular, the 17th through the 20th, Giant's conference tags onto it. Capitalism and Morality takes place the 21st and 22nd, if my memory serves me well.
I think so, yeah.
That's a Saturday and Sunday in Vancouver, British Columbia. It ties onto our conference. If you haven't been to Vancouver in July, I can tell you, in addition to the information that you'll get from the two conferences, the place and the weather will be sublime.
I believe that is capitalismandmorality.com, but I will link to it in this video. Giant's actually going to be a speaker at Libertopia too, so definitely come and catch him. Rick, thank you very much for doing this. I really enjoy these one-on-one interviews. Let's keep it going.
Pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Talk to you later.